What if the most important encounter of your life was not romantic, not political, not even public, but spiritual? What if one conversation could dismantle everything you thought you knew about yourself? In the 13th century, in a quiet Anatolian city called Konya, a respected Islamic scholar met a wandering mystic. Within months, the scholar would abandon his structured identity, withdraw from public teaching, and begin expressing a form of love so intense that his words would echo across centuries. This is not just the story of friendship, it is the story of combustion, of a sun colliding with a planet, of how Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, once a disciplined jurist and theologian, was transformed forever by a man known as Shams of Tabriz. Before the poetry, before the whirling, before the verses about divine love that would one day make him one of the most read poets in the world, Rumi was something very different. Born in 1207 in Balkh, he was raised in a household of scholarship and religious authority. His father was a prominent theologian, and from childhood Rumi was immersed in study, law, Quranic interpretation, theology, logic. Knowledge shaped him, discipline defined him. When political unrest forced his family westward, they eventually settled in Konya, a thriving center of learning within the Seljuk Sultanate. There, Rumi inherited his father's position and quickly became one of the most respected religious scholars in the region. He taught daily. Students gathered around him in large numbers. He delivered sermons that impressed both intellectuals and ordinary townspeople. He issued legal rulings. He was admired, stable, and deeply embedded in the religious structure of society. Outwardly, his life appeared complete. He had family, reputation, disciples, certainty. But inwardly, something remained untouched. He spoke of divine love, yet he had not been shattered by it. He described spiritual ecstasy, yet he had not dissolved inside it. He knew the path, but he had not yet been burned by it. Far from the halls of formal scholarship, another man was walking a very different road. Shams of Tabriz was not interested in status or institutional authority. He was a wandering dervish, known for his intensity, unpredictability, and refusal to conform. He traveled from city to city, searching for something rare, a companion capable of receiving the depth of spiritual truth he carried. Shams believed that real transformation did not come from memorized doctrine, but from annihilation of the ego, from burning away everything false, from standing naked before the divine without identity or title. According to later accounts, Shams had prayed for years, asking to meet someone who could withstand the fire of his presence. He did not want followers. He wanted one soul prepared for ignition, and somehow he was guided to Konya. In 1244, when Shams arrived, Rumi was 37 years old and firmly established as a scholar. The story of their first meeting has been told in many variations, but all versions agree on one thing: it was disruptive. Shams approached Rumi directly, without deference. He did not flatter him. He did not acknowledge his status. Instead, he asked a question that cut beneath theological safety. Who is greater, he reportedly asked, the Prophet Muhammad or Bayezid Bistami? It was not a simple inquiry. It was a spiritual provocation. Rumi gave the orthodox answer, but Shams pressed deeper, challenging assumptions, questioning the nature of spiritual experience versus formal knowledge. Something shifted in that exchange. This was not debate for the sake of argument. It was confrontation at the level of being. Shams spoke as if he saw through Rumi's titles, through his scholarship, into the hidden chambers of his heart. Some narratives say Rumi fainted. Others say they walked away together in immediate, intense conversation. What is clear is that after that day, Rumi's life began to tilt. The respected teacher who once spent his days surrounded by students began withdrawing into private dialogue with the wandering mystic. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. They secluded themselves in deep conversation about love, about ego, about annihilation in the beloved. Shams did not offer structured lessons. He dismantled certainty. He exposed subtle pride hidden beneath piety. He demanded authenticity that could not hide behind eloquence. Outside their seclusion, confusion began to grow. Rumi's students felt displaced. His sudden absence from public teaching stirred unease. Whispers circulated through Konya. Who was this stranger who had taken hold of their master's attention? Why had a disciplined scholar become so absorbed in a wandering dervish? The tension was subtle at first, like a distant rumble of thunder. But inside that closed room, something irreversible was already happening. The identity of the scholar was cracking. The structure that had defined Rumi for decades was beginning to loosen. And as the fire of this encounter intensified, neither of them could have fully predicted how deeply it would shake the city around them, or how profoundly it would transform the soul of the man who would one day be remembered simply as Rumi. The more time Rumi spent with Shams, the more visible the transformation became. The dignified scholar who once moved with measured authority now began to whirl in the streets. He listened to music with tears streaming down his face. He spoke of love, not as metaphor, but as a force that devours the self. Those who had admired his discipline now questioned his sanity. The city of Konya watched in disbelief as their respected jurist seemed to dissolve before their eyes. Shams was not gentle in his methods. He challenged Rumi's attachment to reputation, to approval, to intellectual superiority. He exposed subtle pride hidden beneath scholarship. He forced him to confront the difference between knowing about God and being consumed by God. Under Shams' gaze, Rumi could not hide behind eloquence. Every mask fell away. Their conversations lasted for hours, sometimes days. They spoke of fana, the annihilation of the ego, and of the unbearable sweetness of divine union. Shams insisted that real love destroys everything false, and Rumi, who had spent his life building an identity rooted in knowledge, began to feel that structure burning. What emerged was not weakness, but intensity, not confusion, but awakening. Outside their seclusion, frustration grew. Rumi's disciples felt abandoned. His family felt displaced. Some believed Shams had bewitched him. Others feared that this wandering mystic was corrupting their teacher. The tension thickened like a storm waiting to break. Eventually, that storm erupted. Under pressure and hostility, Shams suddenly disappeared. No warning, no farewell. One day he was there, the next he was gone. Rumi was devastated. The man who had ignited his soul had vanished. At first, Rumi refused to accept it. He searched desperately. He sent disciples to Damascus, believing Shams had fled there. He wrote letters. He wandered in grief. The fire that Shams had lit did not go out. It intensified, but now it burned with longing. For months, Rumi lived in a state of spiritual agony. The presence that had shattered his ego was no longer physically beside him. And yet, something profound began to unfold. In the silence left behind, Rumi started to realize that what he loved in Shams was not merely a person. It was a mirror. It was a reflection of the divine. When Shams eventually returned, according to some accounts, the reunion was overwhelming. Rumi embraced him with tears, and for a brief time the intensity resumed. But the hostility around them had not disappeared. Jealousy had deepened. Resentment had hardened. And then, for the second time, Shams disappeared. This time, he would never return. Some traditions claim he was murdered by those who envied his influence. Others suggest he left voluntarily, understanding that his role in Rumi's life had been fulfilled. The historical truth remains uncertain. What is certain is this: after the second disappearance, Rumi never saw him again. The grief that followed was not ordinary mourning. It was volcanic. Rumi walked the streets crying out Shams' name. He circled in movement, spinning as if trying to align his body with the turning of the cosmos. He listened to the rhythm of drums and felt his heart respond. From this pain, a new expression was born, the whirling dance that would later inspire the Mevlevi order. But more than movement, words began to pour out of him. Poetry, unstoppable and wild. Rumi began composing verses addressed to Shams, not polite poems, not controlled theology, but ecstatic outpourings of longing, union, separation, and divine intoxication. Thousands upon thousands of lines emerged, as if grief had broken a dam inside his chest. He signed many of these poems not with his own name, but with the name of Shams. This was not coincidence. It was revelation. Rumi had begun to understand that Shams was no longer outside of him. The teacher had become internal. The beloved had dissolved into the lover. The sun he had sought in another was now rising from within. And yet, the pain remained real. The human longing did not disappear. In fact, it deepened the poetry. Every verse carried both absence and presence. Every line trembled between loss and union. Rumi was no longer the scholar of Konya. He had become a poet of the infinite, and the world around him would never fully grasp what had happened inside that transformation, because what Shams had truly done was not simply inspire Rumi. He had broken him open, and in that breaking, something vast and luminous began to speak. After the second disappearance of Shams, something irreversible settled into Rumi's being. The frantic searching slowly transformed into a different kind of realization. At first, he had looked outward, convinced that the source of his awakening had been taken from him. He grieved like a lover abandoned, like a disciple without a master. He wandered through Konya calling Shams' name, as if sound alone could summon him back into form. But gradually, through the very intensity of that longing, a deeper understanding emerged. What he had loved in Shams was never confined to a body. The sun, he thought, had set, had not vanished. It had moved inward. Rumi began to perceive Shams not as a lost companion, but as a mirror that had revealed something eternal within himself. The external teacher had awakened the internal guide. The presence he mourned had dissolved into his own consciousness. This realization did not erase the human pain of separation, but it transformed its meaning. Longing became a doorway. Absence became union. Grief became poetry, and poetry poured out of him with unstoppable force. He composed thousands of verses, many of which he dedicated not to himself, but to Shams. The collection that would later be known as the Divan of Shams of Tabriz carries the name of the very man who disappeared. This was not mere tribute, it was testimony. By signing his poems with Shams's name, Rumi was declaring something radical. The lover and the beloved were no longer separate. The one he had sought outside was now inseparable from his own being. From this transformation also emerged the practice of whirling, a physical embodiment of surrender. As musicians played and the rhythm deepened, Rumi would spin, not as performance, but as prayer. The turning symbolized the movement of the cosmos, the orbit of planets around a hidden center. To whirl was to dissolve. To whirl was to align oneself with the unseen axis of divine love. What began as personal ecstasy would eventually inspire a spiritual lineage, but at its origin, it was simply the overflow of a heart that had been broken open. It is easy to romanticize their relationship, to reduce it to legend, to debate whether Shams was murdered or chose exile. Historians still question the details. Was he killed by jealous disciples? Did he leave quietly to protect Rumi? The facts blur across centuries, but the transformation remains undeniable. Before Shams, Rumi was a respected scholar. After Shams, he became a voice of the infinite. Their story forces a difficult question. What does it take to truly change a human being? Information is not enough. Status is not enough. Ritual is not enough. Rumi had all of those before Shams arrived. What he lacked was combustion. Shams did not give him new doctrines. He ignited him. He stripped away the safety of identity and exposed him to the raw experience of divine love. And perhaps that is why this story still resonates today. It speaks to anyone who has felt that knowledge alone is insufficient. To anyone who has sensed that beneath achievement and recognition, something deeper waits to be awakened. Rumi and Shams remind us that transformation is rarely comfortable. It disrupts, it isolates, it burns. But from that burning, a different kind of clarity emerges. In the end, the relationship between Rumi and Shams was not about dependency. It was about revelation. Shams was the catalyst, not the destination. He was the spark that revealed the fire already waiting within Rumi. And once that fire was lit, it could not be extinguished. Not by absence, not by death, not by time. Centuries later, Rumi's words continue to cross cultures, religions, and languages. His poetry speaks of unity beyond division, of love beyond form, of a longing that is both wound and cure. And hidden within nearly every verse is the silent echo of that wandering mystic who dared to confront a scholar and ask him a question that shattered certainty. Maybe the real story is not about two men in 13th century Konya. Maybe it is about the moment in any life when we meet something or someone that refuses to let us remain who we were. The moment when our carefully constructed identity begins to crack. The moment when knowledge turns into experience, when belief turns into fire. And the question is not whether we will meet such a moment. The question is whether we will allow ourselves to burn. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on transformation, love, or the hidden teachers in your own life, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey into history, mysticism, and the lives that change the world. Like this video if you felt the depth of their connection, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with a single encounter.